I sit in my chair, looking out the window at the gray landscape of Colstrip. Outside, the rain is drizzling, pounding on the roof of my old house, too big for one man. 67 years, 40 of which I gave to the mine, and now all I have left is this house and memories. Elaine died 8 years ago. Cancer took her quickly, as if apologizing for coming at all. Sometimes I think I hear her footsteps in the kitchen or quiet laughter from the bedroom, but it's just creaking floorboards and wind in the chimney. The house holds her memory better than the pictures on the mantelpiece. After she died, I thought my son would stop by more often. Aiden, my only child, my boy whom I may have raised too strictly. Now he's 42 years old, with his own family, his own life, and there seems to be less and less room for me in that life. The doorbell interrupts my thoughts. Strange. I'm not expecting anyone. In Colstrip, people usually give notice of a visit, especially in this weather. When I open the door, I'm surprised to see a soaking wet Quentin, my 15-year-old grandson. "Hi, Grandpa," he says, smiling as if the sun had suddenly peeked out from behind the clouds. "Can I see you?" "Quentin, what are you doing here? Does your father know you're here?" The boy hesitates on the threshold, and I realize the answer before he says it. "Not exactly. He thinks I'm at a friend's house, working on a school project." I shake my head but step back, letting him into the house. My soaked jacket goes on the coat rack, my shoes on the newspaper by the door. Quentin, so tall for his age, reminds me subtly of Elaine. The same eyes, the way his eyebrows arch when he's thinking about something. "Are you hungry?" I ask, knowing the answer. Teenagers are always hungry. "Starving," he admits. "Do you have anything normal to eat?" I snicker. At 67, I can still cook better than half the hostesses in Colstrip. Elaine taught me early in our marriage, saying a man should be able to take care of himself. I heat up last night's stew, slice the bread, get the butter. It's nothing special, but Quentin's eating it like it's a royal feast. "Tell me, how are you doing in school?" I ask, watching the food disappear from his plate. "It's okay. I got an A in physics, and I'm on the varsity basketball team. Your father said you had trouble with your studies." Quentin looks up from his plate in surprise. "Really? My grades are good. I can even show you my report card if you want." I nod, not showing my bewilderment. Why did Aiden lie to me about his grandson's grades? To justify not letting him see me more often? "Dad says you're too busy for me to bother you," Quentin says, as if reading my mind. "Is that true?" What could I be busy with? I snicker. Fishing and reading newspapers? "That's what I thought," the boy nods. "But he's always finding reasons why we can't visit you. That you're sick, that you have some business in the city, that you've gone to your friends." I sigh. I don't have any friends to go to. Most of my fellow miners are either dead or have moved to live with their children in other cities. I don't get sick any more often than any other man my age, and I don't even have to do anything in town. Everything I need is brought in once a week by a social worker, a young girl named Chloe. "Does your mom feel the same way?" I ask cautiously. "No," Quentin shakes his head. "Mom's always in favor of visiting you. She says families should stick together, especially after Grandma died. She calls you a lot when Daddy's not home. It's true. Peyton is the only person besides Chloe who checks on my health regularly. She calls once a week, sometimes more. Always asks if I need anything, insists I don't hesitate to ask for help. I seldom ask for help. The old-fashioned way of doing things doesn't allow it, but her care warms my soul. Last Christmas, Peyton insisted I join their family dinner. Aiden tried to talk her out of it, citing some sudden plans with friends, but she was adamant. "Walter shouldn't be alone on Christmas Day period," she said then, and she had the same firmness in her voice that my Elaine had. Aiden gave in, even though he'd been tense and detached all evening. Peyton, on the other hand, created a party atmosphere, serving me the best pieces of turkey, asking me about my life at the mine, how Elaine and I had met. Quentin listened with his mouth open to these stories of a man who rose from the ground black with coal dust, but proud of the work he had done. "Grandfather, tell me more about the mine," Quentin asked, interrupting my memories. "Is it true that once you almost fell in?" I smile. My grandson, unlike his father, was always interested in my work. Aiden was ashamed that his father was a simple miner. He dreamed of a clean office job, of suits and ties, of a life where you didn't have to go underground every day and risk not coming back. It happened. I nod. In the summer of '89, we were working on the lower level, and suddenly there was a cave-in. 3 guys were cut off from the main tunnel. Jim Hawkins and I went after them. I tell about how we waded through the rubble, how we heard the groans of our comrades, how we raked coal and rock with our hands, fearing that the whole tunnel was about to collapse, how they pulled out all 3 of them, although one of them had a broken leg and the other had lost consciousness from a blow to the head, how they themselves barely made it out before another section collapsed. Quentin listens, holding his breath. To him, it's an adventure, a heroic story. For me, it's just an ordinary day at work, one of many. The mind doesn't forgive mistakes or weakness. You either get strong or you don't survive. "Does Dad know about this?" Quentin asks when I finish the story. Of course he does. I came home late, covered in dust and dirt. Your grandmother almost went crazy with excitement. And your father was about 6 years old at the time. He didn't realize the danger. To him, it was just another reason for Daddy to stay late at work. I don't tell my grandson that Aiden, growing up, used this and similar stories as proof that work was always more important to me than family. You risked your life for strangers, but what about Mom and me? What if you hadn't come back? He shouted at me once when I was young. I couldn't explain to him then that it was for them that I worked, for them that I went underground every day, for them that I came back, covered in coal dust but with a paycheck that allowed them to live a better life than I had lived as a child. "Do you miss your work?" Quentin asks. "Sometimes," I admit. I miss the guys, the feeling that I'm doing something important, but I don't miss the 14-hour shifts and how sore my body was afterward. We talk for another hour or so. Quentin talks about school, about his friends, about the girl he likes. I listen, asking questions, glad that at least someone in my family wants to spend time with me. When he's about to leave, I see him reluctantly pull his jacket on, the way he hesitates at the door. "You can come whenever you want," I tell him. "The door is always open for you." "Isn't it?" His face brightens. "Then I'll come more often. Maybe even next weekend." I nod, though I doubt Aiden will let him. Something has changed in my son over the past few years, something I can't quite put my finger on. He's always been ambitious, always striving for a better life, but he didn't have that coldness in him before, that almost contemptuous attitude toward me. After Quentin leaves, I return to the chair by the window. The rain has stopped, and in the gaps between the clouds I can see the setting sun. Thoughts of my son keep me awake. Why does he lie about Quentin's school performance? Why does he prevent us from talking to each other? Why does he make up stories about my busyness? The phone rings, interrupting my thoughts. It's Aiden, his number popping up on the old machine screen. I pick up the phone, wondering if he somehow found out about Quentin's visit. "Dad," Aiden's voice sounds strained. "I have something important to talk to you about." "I'm listening," I reply, preparing myself for accusations that I'm encouraging my grandson's deception. "I need money," he says without preamble. "Quentin has a medical problem, and he needs a special exam, and insurance won't cover it." I feel a chill go through me. Quentin was here less than an hour ago, a healthy, energetic boy. What kind of problems is Aiden talking about? "What's wrong with him?" I ask, trying to make my voice sound concerned, not suspicious. "Lung problems," Aiden answers quickly. Nothing fatal, but he needs a checkup. $5,000. $5,000 is a lot of money for a retiree, even with a minor's pension and savings. But if it was really about my grandson's health, I wouldn't hesitate for a second. Can I talk to Quentin? I ask. He's at the doctor's office with Peyton right now, Aiden stammered. Look, Dad, I don't want an interrogation. If you don't want to help, just say so. I didn't say I didn't want to help, I answer calmly. I just wanted to get the details. What kind of details? I told you there's a problem with my lungs. I need a checkup. Don't come here, just send me the check. I'll give you the address of the clinic. You can send it there if you don't trust me. Those words, don't come, just send me the check, hit harder than he can imagine. Don't come. Don't participate. Don't be a part of our lives. Just give me the money. I'll think about it, I finally say. I'll call you tomorrow. Aiden's not happy, but he can't help it. He mumbles something about time being of the essence, about his son's health being more important than my thoughts, but I hang up. I sit in my chair, staring at the darkening sky. My son just lied to me, lied about his own child's health to get money out of me. For what? And not for the first time, I'm sure. There were other urgent needs: roof repairs, car trouble, mortgage debt. I always gave without asking questions. I felt like it was at least some way to participate in their lives. But today, something is different. Maybe because I had just seen a healthy, happy Quentin. Maybe because the phrase, don't come, just send me a check, made it all too clear what I had become to my own son, an ATM machine, nothing more. I rise from my chair, walk to the kitchen, and pour myself some whiskey. Not a habit, just sometimes you need something to warm old bones and clear your thoughts. I'm not sending a check today. I won't send it tomorrow either. First, I'm going to find out what's going on, why my son is lying to me about his own son, and what this money is really for. The morning was clear, which is rare for Colstrip this time of year. The sun shone through the curtains, painting golden streaks on the faded wallpaper. I sat at the kitchen table, warming my hands over a cup of coffee and thinking about the conversation I'd had with my son yesterday. Something was bugging me, some detail I couldn't quite grasp. Quentin's health. Aiden said the boy had lung problems, that he needed a checkup. But I saw my grandson yesterday. He was full of energy, talking without shortness of breath, not coughing. Of course, not all illnesses are visible to the naked eye, but something didn't add up. I decided to call Peyton. We didn't talk directly that often. She usually called me when Aiden wasn't home. But the situation needed clarity. I dialed her number, feeling slightly nervous. What if she confirmed what her husband had said? What if I was wrong to suspect my son of lying to me? Hello? Peyton's voice sounded a little out of breath as she ran to the phone. Peyton, it's Walter. I'm sorry if I'm interrupting. Walter, she sounded genuinely happy. You never distract me. I was just in the basement going through some old stuff. How are you? Is everything okay? I felt a prick of conscience. She was always so concerned about me, always asking about my health and well-being. And I'm only calling because I want to expose her husband for a liar. I'm fine, thank you. I'm calling about Quentin. Pause. Short, but noticeable. Quentin? What about him? Aiden told me he's having some health problems, something with his lungs. I just wanted to see how he was doing. The pause was longer now. I could almost see Peyton frowning on the other end of the wire, trying to figure out what I was talking about. Walter, there's nothing wrong with Quentin, she said finally. He's healthy as an ox. He even won a race at the school track meet yesterday. What's the problem with his lungs? I felt a chill go through me. So Aiden lied. Not just an exaggeration or an understatement, an outright lie about his own son's health. Aiden called me yesterday, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Said Quentin needed a special exam that insurance wouldn't cover. Asked for money. What? Peyton's voice was so genuinely surprised that I had no doubts about her ignorance. Quentin doesn't have any medical problems, and there are no tests planned. I would know, I'm his mother. She sounded not only surprised, but also tired, as if it wasn't the first time her husband's words were at odds with reality. It made me even more wary. "Peyton," I said gently, "do you have any idea why Aiden might need the money?" She sighed, and there was so much in that sigh: annoyance, humility, sadness. "He's always complaining about financial problems," she said quietly. "House bills, car repairs, some investment that's bound to make a profit. But we never have enough money, even though he makes a good living. I don't know, Walter. I really don't." I could hear the desperation in her voice. Peyton had always struck me as a strong woman, but now she had the weariness of someone who'd spent too long trying to pretend everything was okay. "Had you talked to him about it?" I asked. "I tried. He either dismisses it or accuses me of mistrust. Lately he's been strange. He often stays late at work, talks about some important projects, but never tells me anything specific. And the money." She hesitated. "I'm sorry, Walter. I shouldn't be dumping our problems on you." "It's okay," I said softly. "You're part of my family, Peyton. I want to help if I can." "You already are." I could hear the gratitude in her voice. "Aiden will never admit it, but your financial support has helped us out more than once. I just don't understand why he lied about Quentin. It's just too much. I didn't either. Why use his son's health as an excuse? Did Aiden really think I wouldn't find out the truth? Or did he not care if I found out or not as long as he got the money?" "Peyton," I said, making a decision, "I'm not giving him the money this time. I can't encourage that kind of lying." "I understand," she said quietly, "and I don't blame you. I would have done the same thing." We talked some more about Quentin, about her work at the clinic, about the minutiae of everyday life. Peyton always had a way of making even the most abnormal situations feel normal. As we were saying goodbye, she said, "I always told Aiden that he should appreciate you, that not everyone is lucky enough to have a father who is always willing to help, who has worked his whole life for his family. I don't know if he hears me." After that conversation, I sat looking out the window at my neglected garden for a long time. Elaine used to grow roses and tomatoes there. Now there were only weeds and an old apple tree that still bore fruit against all odds. Something was happening to my son, something even his wife didn't know about, and I had to find out what it was. The solution came surprisingly easy. If Aiden was hiding something, I had to follow him, find out where he goes, who he meets, what he spends the money he begs me for. For someone my age, it was a crazy idea. But I spent 40 years working in the mines, and I learned to rely on my instincts and not be afraid of challenges. If my son is leading a double life, I'll know about it. The next day, I took up position in my old pickup truck not far from Aiden's office. The trading company where he worked as a manager was located in a small business center on the outskirts of town. I arrived toward the end of the workday, parked where I could see the exit, and waited. Aiden showed up around 6 in the evening. He walked briskly, looking at his phone, oblivious to everything around him. I recognized that gait, the same purposeful gait he'd had as a kid, when he'd rushed to soccer practice or to his friends' houses. Only now there was a nervousness in it, as if he was afraid he'd be late for an important meeting. He got into his car, a brand new SUV that he said was essential to his job. I started the pickup and prepared to follow him at a distance. Thankfully, there aren't too many cars in Colstrip to get lost in the traffic. To my surprise, Aiden wasn't going home. He headed in the opposite direction, toward a new neighborhood where townhouses and small condominiums had sprouted up in recent years. The neighborhood was considered upscale, at least by Colstrip standards. I kept my distance, trying not to attract attention. My old pickup was noticeable among the newer cars in the neighborhood, but luckily Aiden wasn't looking in the rearview mirror. He was focused on the road, occasionally glancing at his phone as if waiting for an important message. Finally, He parked near one of the townhouses. I stopped across the street, pulled my cap over my eyes, and watched. Aiden got out of the car, looked around. I ducked down so he wouldn't see me, and headed toward the house. He had a key. I saw him open the door without ringing the bell. Something squeezed inside me. My son had keys to a house he didn't live in, a house he'd come to after work instead of going back to his wife and son. I waited. An hour. 2. Dusk was settling in. Lights flickered on in the windows of the townhouse. I could see silhouettes behind the curtains, 2 adults. I couldn't see well from my seat, but it seemed the second silhouette was female. At 9 p.m., I got a text from Peyton. Aiden said he's staying late at work because of an important meeting. Quentin says hi. I didn't reply. What could I say? That her husband wasn't at work right now, but at someone else's house with some woman. Around 10, the door of the townhouse opened and Aiden came out. He looked relaxed, happy even. I hadn't seen him like that in years, at least not in my presence. He waved to someone at the door, I couldn't see who was standing there, and got in his car and drove away. I didn't follow him. Instead, I continued to stare at the house. A few minutes later, the figure in the doorway, a woman, I was sure now, went back inside and the door closed. My son was seeing another woman. He had a secret life that neither I nor Peyton knew about, and maybe that life was where the money he was begging me for, under various pretexts, was going. I came home late, with a heavy heart and even heavier thoughts. Aiden was betraying his family. He lied to Peyton, he lied to Quentin, he lied to me, and he was using my money to pay for his double life. For the next few days, I continued my surveillance. I established a routine. Aiden visited the townhouse 3 times a week, always after work, always with the same excuse for Peyton. Important meeting, corporate, dinner with a client. I didn't contact my son, didn't respond to his texts reminding me of money for Quentin's treatment. I needed more information. On the 4th day, I decided to take a chance. As Aiden drove away from the townhouse, I went to the door and rang the bell. My heart was pounding like crazy. I didn't know what I would say if the door opened, but I needed to see her, this woman who was the cause of my son's lies. The door didn't open immediately. First there were footsteps, then a voice. "Did you forget something, dear?" And then I saw her, a young woman in her 30s with brown hair and surprised eyes. She was beautiful, not the flashy kind of beauty you see on magazine covers, but a quiet, homely beauty. And she was pregnant. "You're not Aiden," she said, taking a step back. "Who are you?" I stood there, unable to say a word. Pregnant. This woman was expecting a child, my son's baby. I started, but I didn't know what to say. "I'm the father of the man who's cheating on you. I'm the grandfather of the child you're carrying." You look like him," she said suddenly, staring intently into my face. "Are you related to Aiden?" "I'm his father," I answered finally. "Walter Bishop." She turned pale and grabbed the door jamb as if she were suddenly sick. "Father? But Aiden said his father had died years ago, that he'd grown up without a father. Now it was my turn to go pale. Aiden told this woman that I was dead, that he grew up without a father, me, who'd worked my whole life to give him a better future. "He lied to you," I said quietly, as he had lied to so many others. She looked at me, and understanding slowly appeared in her eyes. Realization that the man she trusted, the man she might have loved, was not who he said he was. "You'd better come in," she said finally, stepping aside. "I think we have something to talk about." Her name was Violet Kane. She worked as a florist in a small store downtown. She met Aiden 3 years ago when he ordered flowers for an office event. He was attentive, charming, generous, said he was divorced, that he had a son he saw on weekends, that his ex-wife had done everything she could to turn the kid against him. "I should have known," Violet said as we sat in her small but cozy living room. "There were signs. He never stayed the night, always found reasons why I couldn't meet his son, never introduced me to friends or co-workers. She told me she'd gotten pregnant 6 months ago. Aiden was thrilled, said they'd be a real family now. He promised to buy a bigger house as soon as he sorted out the finances. He brought money regularly, for rent, for doctors, for shopping for the baby. I thought he was saving for a down payment on a house, she said, stroking her stomach absently. He said he'd gotten a promotion, that things were going well. I was such a fool. I looked at her and saw her not as a separator, not as a lover, but as another victim of my son's lies. Aiden wasn't just deceiving his family. He was deceiving this woman too, giving her false hopes, making plans with her for a future that couldn't be. "What are you going to do now?" I asked. Violet shrugged, and there was so much helplessness in that gesture that my heart sank. "I don't know. I love him, or loved the man he pretended to be. Now I don't even know who he really is. I didn't know either. My son, my Aiden, had turned into a man I didn't recognize, a man capable of such elaborate lies." As I was leaving, Violet stopped me at the door. "Will you tell his wife?" she asked me. I didn't know what to say. Should I shatter Peyton's world by telling her the truth, or let the lies continue until she discovered it all on her own? What right did I have to interfere in their lives? "I don't know," I answered honestly. "But I do know that this situation can't go on indefinitely. Sooner or later the truth will come out." Violet nodded, her eyes full of tears. "If you see him, don't say you were here, okay? I have to decide for myself what to do next," I promised. What else could I do? On the drive home, I remembered how Peyton always defended me to Aiden, how she tried to fix our relationship, telling her son that he should appreciate a father who'd worked his whole life for his family, how she insisted on family dinners, on holidays together, on Quentin knowing his grandfather. And Aiden had used her trust, her love of family values to cover up his double life. He lied to her, he lied to his son, he lied to me, he lied to Violet, built his life on deception, using all of us as pawns in some obscure game of his. At home, I sat in the dark for a long time, not turning on the light, just staring at nothing. What was I supposed to do with what I had learned? What would a decent man, a decent father, do in my place? Elaine had always said that the truth, no matter how bitter, was better than the sweetest lie. She wouldn't approve of my silence. She wouldn't approve of me letting the deception continue. But how to tell Peyton? How do I shatter the peace of a woman who had always been good to me, who loved my son despite all his flaws? I didn't know the answer, but I did know that I could no longer be complicit in Aiden's lies. I couldn't give him the money he was spending on his second family. I couldn't look Peyton and Quentin in the eye knowing they were being lied to. The decision didn't come right away, but when it did, I realized it was the only way out. I couldn't control my son's actions. I couldn't force him to be honest, but I could stop supporting his lies, and I could let Peyton see the truth for herself, make her own decision. Aiden called me a day later, reminding me again about the money for Quentin's cure. I told him I'd think about it, that I needed time. He wasn't happy, but he couldn't push too hard. After all, I was his father, a source of financial support he couldn't lose. Peyton called too, just to talk, to see how I was doing. She always did, even on her busiest days, taking a moment to check in and see if I was okay. There was the same warmth in her voice, the same genuine concern that she always had. I almost told her the truth. I almost did, but I stopped at the last moment. Not on the phone, not like that. I remembered how Peyton had always tried to make things right with Aiden and me. How she'd told her son that he should appreciate me, should realize that not everyone was lucky enough to have a father who was always willing to help. How she explained to Quentin why it was important to visit his grandfather, to listen to his stories, to learn from him. And Aiden had only used her good intentions. used her belief in family values to cover his own sins. Maybe he even believed he was doing it for her because the truth could hurt her. But the lies hurt even more, just delayed, building up with each passing day. Elaine wouldn't approve of my silence. She always said that a family should be built on honesty, on trust. That lies corrode relationships from the inside out like rust corrodes metal, slowly, imperceptibly, but inexorably. I made a decision. I couldn't control my son's actions. I couldn't force him to be an honest man, a decent husband and father, but I could stop being complicit in his deception. I could give Peyton a chance to see the truth, to make his own decisions about his life. So I started collecting evidence. Pictures of Eden entering Violet's townhouse. Tapes of our conversations where he asked for money for his son's non-existent medical care. Checks I'd written him over the years, with his notes on what the money was supposedly going for. Evidence of the lies that poisoned the lives of our entire family. Evidence I could no longer keep to myself. The week passed in heavy reflection. Each night I sat at the kitchen table, laying out the evidence I had collected. Photographs, tapes of conversations, receipts. Tangible evidence of my son's double life. I looked at them and wondered how to get this information to Peyton without ruining it completely. On Thursday, I decided to go into town to get groceries. Usually, Chloe, the social worker, brought them, but I needed to get some air to get out of the house where I was trapped with my heavy thoughts. The day was cool but sunny. Colstrip had never been a pretty town, a mining village that had grown to the size of a small town, but had retained its practical, unadorned architecture. But today, in the clear autumn light, even its gray buildings seemed almost welcoming. I walked slowly down the main street, stopping at shop windows, looking at passers-by. Some of them said hello. In small towns like this, everyone knows each other, especially old-timers like me. I nodded back, sometimes exchanged a few words, but I didn't stay long. I didn't want to talk, to ask about my son and grandson, which is common in such cases. Outside the supermarket, I suddenly saw Peyton. She was standing at the entrance, going through the contents of her purse with a tense expression on her face, as if she were solving a complex math problem. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a careless bun. Her clothes looked shabby jeans with scuffs, a sweater pulled up to her elbows. Not unkempt, more like thrifty, the way a person who counts every dollar dresses. I wanted to walk past her, unnoticed. I wasn't ready to talk to her, not now, with thoughts of her husband's betrayal bubbling in my head. But she looked up and noticed me. Her face lit up with a smile, a genuine, warm smile, as if meeting me had been the best part of her day. "Walter!" She waved her hand, quickly tucking her purse into her bag. What a surprise! I walked over, feeling awkward. How do I look a woman in the eye knowing that her husband, my son, is leading a double life? "Peyton," I nodded, trying to smile. "I didn't expect to see you here." "It's my day off." She fixed a loose strand of hair. "I thought I'd do some shopping while Quentin was at school. How are you? How's your blood pressure?" Typical Peyton, always asking about my health. She remembered my blood pressure problems better than I did. "It's fine," I replied. "I'm taking my meds as I should." She looked at me carefully, as if checking to see if I was telling the truth. Then she nodded, satisfied with my answer. "Good. Aiden said you didn't look so good when he came to see you last week." I froze. Aiden didn't come by last week. Not for 2 months, if not more. "He's exaggerating," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "There's nothing wrong with me." Peyton smiled, but there was something like doubt in her eyes. Did she not believe me? Or didn't believe Aiden? "Why don't we get some coffee?" she suggested out of the blue. "I have another half hour before I have to go shopping for dinner." I wanted to say no. I wanted to say I was in a hurry, that I had things to do. But something in her eyes, tiredness, loneliness maybe, made me agree. We went to the little cafe across the street. It wasn't the most sophisticated place. Plastic tables, shabby menus, the smell of cheap coffee and donuts. but it was clean, and the coffee was decent. "Do you come into town a lot?" Peyton asked when we were seated at a table by the window. "Not really," I admitted. "Usually Chloe brings me everything I need." "Chloe?" "The social worker. Comes in once a week, brings groceries, checks up on me." Peyton frowned. "I didn't know you had a social worker coming over. Aiden never mentioned it." "He doesn't know," I said. "I didn't tell him. I didn't want him to think like I wasn't coping on my own. It was the truth. I'd never told my son about Chloe, about how she helped me with household chores. Pride prevented me from admitting that I, a man who had spent his life taking care of others, now needed help myself." "Walter," Peyton covered my hand with hers, "you shouldn't hide things like this. That's what family is for, to help each other." Her hand was warm, with calluses on the palm of her hand, the marks of work that shouldn't have been so much at her age. I remembered her mentioning a part-time cleaning job on weekends. Why? Aiden was making good money, and with my gifts, they should be living quite comfortably. "How are you guys doing?" I asked, gently releasing my hand. "Is everything okay?" She looked away, wincing slightly as if my question had hurt her. "Fine," she said, but her voice sounded unsure. "Quentin's doing well in school. He's even been chosen for a science project." Aiden works hard." I noticed her fingers trembling when she said her husband's name. Something was wrong, something she didn't want to talk about. "Peyton," I began gently, "if there's a problem—" "No!" she interrupted me too quickly. "No, it's nothing like that. It's just, you know, normal family stuff. Everyone goes through it." I looked at her tired face, at her worn sweater, at her blistered hands from a job that shouldn't have been so much a part of her life. And I realized she was lying. Not as sophisticated as Aiden, but she was lying, perhaps even to herself. "Don't you think it's strange," I said, deciding to come at it from a different angle, "that Aiden won't let Quentin visit me?" Peyton flinched as if I'd hit her. "He's not forbidding it," she said quietly. "It's just, he has his own ideas about parenting. He thinks Quentin should spend more time studying, playing sports, getting ready for college." "Quentin came to see me last week," I said. "Secretly. Said my dad thought he was at a friend's house." Peyton closed her eyes for a moment, as if trying to deal with the sudden pain. "I knew it," she whispered. "He can't lie, my boy." I could see he was hiding something, but I decided not to ask, I thought. I thought maybe it was a girl. "He's a very nice guy," I said sincerely. "Smart, well-mannered. You can be proud of him." "I am," she smiled weakly. "Every day." We were silent for a moment. I looked at her and thought about how unfair life can be. This woman deserved better than a husband who lied to her, cheated on her, spent the family money on a mistress. "Aiden forbid you to visit me?" I asked bluntly. Peyton jerked as if from a blow, and I realized I'd hit the mark. "Not exactly forbidding," she said after a pause. "It's just, he always has some reason why it's inconvenient. You've got company, or you're not feeling well, or something. And you believe him?" She looked at me with a long stare that showed so many things: doubt, fatigue, silent understanding. "Not always," she admitted quietly. "But what can I do? He's my husband, the father of my son. We're family." There was so much doomed resignation in her voice that I wanted to shake her, to make her see the truth. But I held back. "Not here, not like this." "A family should be built on trust," I said. "On honesty." "I know," she lowered her eyes. "But sometimes it's easier to pretend everything's okay. For Quentin's sake." We finished our coffee in a heavy silence. I could see that she was struggling with herself, that some part of her already realized what was going on but refused to admit it out loud. When we left the cafe, Peyton suddenly hugged me, tightly, desperately, as if she were clinging to something solid in her shaky life. "Thank you," she whispered, "for listening, for being you." I hugged her back, feeling how fragile she was under that stretchy sweater. My sister-in-law, the woman who had always treated me with such warmth and respect, the woman whose world I was about to destroy. "It's going to be okay," I said, not believing my own words. "It's going to be okay." She pulled away, smiled weakly, brushed away an unsolicited tear. "Of course," she nodded. "I will." We parted ways, she to the supermarket, me to my pickup. On the way home, I thought about what I'd seen in her eyes. It wasn't just tiredness or financial hardship there. There was knowledge there, maybe not complete, but enough to hurt. Already she suspected something was wrong. Already felt she was being cheated. Just didn't want to or couldn't admit it, even to herself. This meeting strengthened my resolve. Peyton deserved to know the truth, no matter how bitter it was. Deserved to be able to make her own decision based on facts, not lies. At home, I continued to gather evidence. I organized the photos, labeled dates and places. I printed out bank statements showing the amounts Aiden had allegedly spent on family expenses. I recorded conversations where he asked for money for Quentin's non-existent medical treatment. I had to be sure that when Peyton saw this evidence, she would have no doubts. There would be no way to convince herself that it was a mistake, a misunderstanding, that there was an innocent explanation for everything. 2 days after our meeting, Aiden called again. His voice sounded strained with ill-concealed irritation. "Dad, you promised to help with Quentin's treatment. It's been a week and still no money." "I'm still thinking," I answered calmly. "What's there to think about?" There was a hint of anger in his voice. "This is about your grandson's health." "I talked to Peyton," I said, checking his reaction. She said Quentin was fine. A pause. A long, tense pause. "When did you talk to Peyton?" he finally asked, and there was something akin to fear in his voice. "Met her in town," I tried to keep my voice casual. "We had coffee, talked." "About what?" he asked quickly. "What did you talk about?" "All sorts of things," I was deliberately vague. "About Quentin, about her work, about you." Another pause, even more tense. "Peyton doesn't always understand the situation," he said finally. "I didn't want to bother her with unnecessary details about Quentin's health. She worries too much." "I understand," I said, even though the only thing I really understood was that my son continued to lie, even when he was cornered. "I'll let you know my decision about the money." "Okay." He was obviously happy to change the subject. "But don't drag it out, okay? It's important." After the conversation, I sat staring at my phone for a long time. Aiden hadn't just lied. He'd been willing to keep lying, even when I'd let him know I knew the truth. He didn't repent. He didn't confess. He didn't try to explain himself. He just made up a new lie to cover up the old one. I remembered Peyton's face, her tired eyes, her worn sweater. I remembered her talking about family, about trust, about how sometimes it was easier to pretend everything was okay, for Quentin's sake. But was it fair to live a lie for someone, even your own child? Elaine wouldn't do that. She'd always said that children could sense falsity, that it wasn't the truth, no matter how bitter, that hurt them, but the understatement, the tension that lies created in a family. I made a final decision. I gathered all the evidence into one folder, added a letter explaining why I decided to reveal the truth. I didn't judge Aiden. It wasn't my place to judge my son, no matter how much his actions hurt me. I simply laid out the facts, attached the evidence, and expressed my regret for having to do it this way. Then I found a suitable box, put the evidence folder in it, sealed it, wrote the address on it. I knew that Aiden usually opened the mail as soon as he got it, often in front of Peyton. She would see everything for herself, with her own eyes, without my comments or explanations. Maybe it was cruel. Perhaps I should have found another way, a gentler, more forgiving way. But I didn't see it. Any attempt to tell Peyton in person would have been intercepted by Aiden, refuted, presented as the ramblings of an old man out of his mind. And what could I say? Your husband, my son, is leading a double life. He has a mistress who's expecting a child with him. He spends the money I give him for your needs to support another family. What words can be used to soften such a truth? No. Let the documents speak for themselves. Let the photographs, the tapes of conversations, the account statements tell the story I could not tell myself. At the post office, an elderly woman who knew me from my days working in the mine looked at the box with curiosity. "A present for your grandson?" she asked, smiling. "Something like that," I answered without going into details. She didn't inquire further, just processed the shipment and gave me a receipt. 3 or 4 days, she said, and the package would be delivered. 3 or 4 days, and then my son's life, his wife's life, my grandson's life will change forever, and I would be the cause of that change. When I walked out of the post office, I felt a strange sense of relief. It was as if the heaviness I had been carrying around since I learned the truth was finally beginning to let go. I didn't know what the future would bring. I didn't know if Peyton and Quentin would forgive me for ruining their family. I didn't know if Aiden would ever be able to understand why I did what I did. But I did know one thing. I was no longer complicit in the lie, no longer supporting the deception that poisoned the lives of the people I loved. No matter what happened next, I could look in the mirror and not look away. On the drive home, I remembered meeting Peyton, her tired eyes, her genuine concern for my health. I remembered her talking about family, about trust, about how sometimes it was easier to pretend everything was okay. I hoped she would find the strength to accept the truth, no matter how bitter it was. That she'd realize I didn't do it out of revenge, not out of a desire to destroy their family, but because I believed she deserved to know who she lived with. This woman who had always treated me with such warmth and respect, who had tried to mend my relationship with my son, who had insisted that Quentin know his grandfather, she deserved better than a life of lies, better than a husband who betrayed her every day, every hour. I didn't know if she'd find the strength to leave Aiden, to start a new life. I didn't know if she could forgive him if he repented. It wasn't my decision. It wasn't my business. I just gave her a chance to see the truth, to make her own choices based on facts, not lies. When I got home, I suddenly felt terribly tired, as if all those weeks of straining, tracking, thinking had finally caught up with me. I sat down in my chair by the window, the same one I'd been sitting in when I'd gotten the call from Aiden asking for money for Quentin's cure. It was strange how one event could change a whole life, set off a chain that would lead to such unexpected consequences. I didn't know what the next few days would bring. I didn't know if Aiden would be furious, if he would come to me with accusations, with threats. I didn't know how Peyton would react, what Quentin would say. But whatever happened, I was ready to face it with my eyes open. After all I'd done was tell the truth. And the truth, no matter how bitter, is always better than the sweetest lie. That's what Elaine used to say. And I believed her then, and I believe her now. The package was supposed to arrive in 3 or 4 days. But the next day, as I was preparing a modest dinner, the doorbell rang. It was sharp, insistent, as if the person who pressed the button had put all his fury into this action. I knew who it was before I even opened the door. Aiden stood on the threshold, breathing heavily, as if he'd been running. His face was contorted with anger, his eyes red with tears or fury or both. In his hand, he was clutching the very evidence folder I'd sent yesterday. "What the hell did you do?" he spat out in lieu of a greeting, waving the folder in my face. I stepped back silently, letting him inside. There was no point in making a scene on the doorstep, where any passing neighbor could see or hear us. In Colstrip, rumors spread faster than wildfire. Aiden burst into the house, tossed the folder onto the coffee table. The photos scattered across the floor, images of him entering Violet's house, standing with her by the car, his hand on her visibly rounded belly. "Were you following me?" His voice shook with barely contained rage. My own father was spying on me like some pervert? I looked at him calmly, Strangely, I felt no fear or anger in response to his rage, only a deep, overpowering weariness. I wasn't spying, I said quietly. I just wanted to know the truth. To know what the money you're asking me for is really being used for. That's my business, he shouted, slamming his fist into the wall. The impact rattled the glass in the sideboard. My life! You had no right to interfere. And Peyton? I asked, still calm. Does she have the right to know that her husband leads a double life? That he has another woman expecting a child with him? Aiden looked away abruptly, as if he couldn't bear to look at me. His shoulders tensed, his hands clenched into fists. You don't understand, he said quietly, almost pleadingly. It's complicated. It's not as simple as you think it is. Explain it to me, I suggested, pointing to the chair. I'm listening. He didn't sit down. Instead, he paced around the room like a caged animal, waving his hands occasionally, as if chasing away invisible ghosts. Do you think I wanted it to turn out this way? He finally asked. Do you think I planned all this? I don't think anything, I answered honestly. I just want to understand why my son is lying to his wife, to his father, to his son. Why he's using the money I give him for his family's needs to support another woman. Aiden stopped, looked at me with a new expression, not just anger but something akin to contempt. You've always been like this, he said quietly. Always thought you knew what was right, always judging me no matter what I did. I'm not judging you, I shook my head. I just want to understand. Understand? He laughed bitterly. What exactly do you want to understand? That I've met a woman who really loves me, who sees me as more than just an ATM machine, a source of money to pay the bills and buy groceries, who is interested in my thoughts, my feelings, and not just how much money I made this month. I listened and didn't recognize my son. Was this really how he saw his marriage to Peyton? As a financial transaction in which he was just a source of money? Peyton loves you, I said quietly. She's always taken care of you, always supported you. Loves me? He interrupted bitterly. She loves the idea of family. She loves the status of being a married woman, loves not having to work full time because her husband provides for the family. But me? Me? When was the last time she asked me what I wanted? What are my dreams? How do I feel? I remained silent, not knowing what to say. Did he really believe what he was saying? Or was it just a convenient lie he'd made up to justify his actions? Violet's asking, he continued a little more quietly. She listens. She understands me in ways Peyton never did. And that's why you lied to her, I said, not asking but affirming. Told her I was dead, that you grew up without a father. Aiden flinched as if I'd hit him. So Violet had told me the truth. Yeah, I should have said something, he mumbled. She wouldn't understand why I didn't introduce her to my family if she knew I had a father. Why didn't you introduce her to your family? I asked. Why didn't you divorce Peyton if she didn't understand or love you? Why didn't you start a new life openly, honestly? Aiden turned away, staring out the window. It was starting to rain outside the window, the drops dripping down the glass like tears. You wouldn't understand, he said quietly. It's not that simple. Explain it to me, I repeated. I want to understand. He turned to me, and in his eyes I saw something new, not anger, not contempt, but fear. A deep, almost childlike fear. I can't lose Quentin, he said faintly. If Peyton and I divorce, she'll get custody. I know she will. She's the perfect mom, everyone will say that. And me. I'll just be a weekend dad who sees his son once every 2 weeks if I'm lucky. There was so much pain in his voice that for a moment I almost believed him. I almost did. But then I remembered how rarely he spent time with his son even now, living in the same house. How Quentin used to visit me secretly because his father supposedly thought he was too busy to visit his grandfather. Are you afraid of losing your son? I said slowly. And that's why you decided to have another child, with the woman you lied about your life to. Aiden flinched as if I'd hit him. Then his face contorted in a grimace of anger. "I didn't plan this," he shouted. "You think I wanted Violet to get pregnant? It just happened. And now I have to clean up this mess somehow, and you've just made it worse." "I complicated it?" I questioned, feeling the anger finally rising inside me. "Didn't you start dating another woman? Didn't you lie to everyone around you? Didn't you use my money to pay for your double life? What was I supposed to do?" His voice trailed off into a scream. "Violet needed money for rent, for doctors. I couldn't leave her, not when she was expecting my baby. And I couldn't leave Peyton and Quentin," I added. So decided to keep lying to everyone, including me. Aiden lowered his head as if under the weight of my words. "I'm not proud of it," he said quietly. "But I didn't see any other way out." "There's always another way," I argued. "Honesty, open conversation, solving problems together, not running away from them." "Easy for you to say," he flared up again. "You were always so right, so infallible. You always knew the right thing to do, and you didn't realize how hard it was to live up to your high standards." There was so much bitterness in his words, so much lingering resentment, that I was confused for a moment. Was I really such a father? Demanding, intransigent, unable to understand my own son's weaknesses? "I just wanted you to grow up to be an honest man," I said quietly. "A man who keeps his word. A man who takes responsibility for his actions." "And look how well that worked out," he grinned bitterly. "I lie to everyone around me, including myself." We fell silent. The only sounds in the silence were the ticking of the old clock on the wall and the sound of the rain outside the window. Finally, I asked what I really wanted to know. "How did Peyton react? To the package, to the evidence?" Aiden sighed, suddenly looking less like an angry man and more like a tired, broken man. "No way," he said quietly. "Just nothing." I opened the box, laid out all the pictures, read your letter. And then she silently gathered up my things and shoved me out the door. Didn't even yell or cry. She just said, "Go away. I don't want to see you." I pictured the scene. Peyton, with her tired eyes and weary hands, silently packing up her husband's things, no tantrums, no dramatic gestures, maintaining her dignity even as her world was crumbling. It made me respect her even more. "Where do you live now?" I asked. "At a friend's house," he answered reluctantly. "Temporarily, until I decide what to do next." "Not Violet's?" Aiden shook his head, the gesture so tired and defeated. "She kicked me out too when she found out the truth. Said she couldn't be with a man who lied so easily." I felt a prick of sympathy. My son had lost everything. Both families, both women, possibly both children. He stood before me, broken by his own mistakes, his own lies. "I'm sorry," I said sincerely. "Not that I told the truth, but that you were in this situation." Aiden looked up and there was so much pain in his eyes, so much confusion, that for a moment I saw in him the little boy I'd once taught to ride a bike, the one I'd comforted when he'd fallen and failed. "What am I going to do now, Daddy?" he asked, and there was an almost childlike helplessness in his voice. "How do I make things right?" I shook my head. That was something I didn't know. Some mistakes can't be undone. Some bridges once burned can't be rebuilt. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "But you have to start with the truth, acknowledging your mistakes, a willingness to take responsibility for your actions." "Peyton won't forgive me," he said quietly. "Never." "Maybe," I agreed, "and maybe in time. But even if he doesn't, you have to do the right thing. For Quentin's sake, if not for your own." We sat in silence for a while longer. Then Aiden started picking up the photos scattered on the floor, putting them back in the folder. His movements were mechanical, lifeless, as if he were doing some meaningless task simply because he needed something to occupy his hands. "Does Quentin know?" I asked. Aiden shook his head. "Peyton said she'd tell him herself. Something about us breaking up, that we'd be better off apart. I don't think she's going to tell him the whole truth, at least not right now. I nodded. It was like Peyton to protect her son even in a situation like this, to shield him from the pain that knowing the full truth would cause. She's a good mother, I said, and a good wife. Was. Aiden flinched, as if my words had caused him physical pain. I know, he whispered. That's why. He didn't finish, but I understood. That's why his betrayal was so bitter, so unforgivable. And Violet? I asked. What would happen to her? With the baby? Aiden shrugged, but there was no indifference in the gesture, more like a deep confusion. She said she could handle it on her own, that she wanted nothing to do with a man who could lie so easily. She said she didn't want her child to grow up to be like me. Those were cruel words, but I couldn't blame Violet. She was a victim in this story too, cheated, used, abandoned with a baby in her arms. Are you going to help her? Financially, I mean. Of course, Aiden nodded. It's my baby after all. I'm not going to give up on him. I nodded, satisfied with that answer. At least he was doing the right thing. What about you? I asked. What are you going to do now? Aiden was silent for a long time, staring out the window at the rain which was getting heavier by the minute. I don't know, he said at last. Find a new place to live, for starters. Then trying to patch things up with Quentin, if Peyton will let me. She'll let me, I said confidently. She's not the type to use children as weapons in an adult war. Unlike me, huh? Aiden grinned bitterly. That's exactly what I was doing, using Quentin as an excuse to get money out of you. I didn't deny it. It was the truth, as bitter as it sounded. Why didn't you just ask? I asked. Why didn't you say, Dad, I need money for Violet? I could have said no, sure, but at least it would have been the truth. Aiden shook his head as if my question was naive. Because then I'd have to explain who Violet was, and that would mean admitting what I was doing, what I'd become. His voice shook on the last words, and I saw tears glisten in his eyes. For the first time in our entire conversation, I saw in him not anger, not fear, but real shame. Shame for his actions, for his lies, for the man he had become. And it gave me a tiny, barely perceptible hope. Maybe somewhere deep inside that confused, lying man, my son still lived. The boy I'd taught honesty, responsibility, respect for others. Maybe all was not yet lost. What do I do, Dad? He asked again, and now his voice was pleading, not angry. How do I make things right? I sighed. That was something I didn't know. Some mistakes can't be undone completely. Some wounds don't heal without scars. Start with the truth, I repeated. With everyone. With Peyton. With Violet. With Quentin. When the time was right. With yourself, first and foremost. Admit your mistakes. Take responsibility for your actions. And from there, then you'll see. Aiden nodded as if my words had some special meaning for him. He finished gathering the photos, closed the folder, and put it on the table. Thank you, he said quietly, for listening, for not kicking me out right away. I nodded. What else could I do? He was my son, despite all his mistakes, all his sins. I didn't approve of his actions, but I couldn't stop loving him, couldn't stop hoping he'd find his way back to the man he could be. By the time he left, it was almost dark. The rain had turned into a downpour pounding on the roof, on the windows, like it was trying to reach us through the walls and glass. I'll call you, Aiden said, standing on the doorstep. I'll let you know how it's going, if you want to know. I do, I said. You're my son, no matter what. He nodded, not looking me in the eye, and walked out into the rain. I watched him walk to his car, hunched over under the water, as if under the weight of his mistakes and their consequences. When his car disappeared around the corner, I closed the door and went back inside. Suddenly it seemed even emptier and quieter than usual. I sat in my chair by the window, looking out at the rain, and thought about Peyton, about how she'd reacted to the news of her husband's betrayal. No screaming, no tantrums, with the quiet dignity of a woman who knows her worth. She simply packed up his things and shoved him out the door. No screaming, no crying, just said, "Go away, I don't want to see you." There was more power in that simplicity, in that calmness, than in any dramatic gesture. I remembered our meeting in town, her tired eyes, her worn sweater, how she'd asked about my health, how she'd listened to my stories about the mine, how she'd talked about family, how sometimes it was easier to pretend everything was okay, for Quentin's sake. Now she didn't have to pretend anymore. Now she knew the truth, no matter how bitter it was. And judging by the reaction Aiden had described, she'd found the strength to accept that truth, to face it with dignity. That made me respect her even more. In a world where it's so easy to lie, where so many people choose the easy path of self-deception, she chose the truth, chose to face reality, no matter how painful it was. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if Peyton would contact me, if she would want to talk about what happened. I didn't know if I would ever see Quentin again, my grandson, who loved so much to hear my stories about the mine. But I knew one thing. I had done the right thing by telling the truth. Whatever the consequences, I was no longer complicit in the lies that poisoned the lives of the people I loved. It was a week after Aiden's visit. He called twice, briefly, dryly informing me that he'd found an apartment, that he'd talked to a lawyer about the divorce, that Peyton had agreed to meet with Quentin over the weekend. No emotion, no details, as if he were reading off a report, keeping his promise to keep me informed. He said little about Peyton and Quentin, only the essentials. I sensed he was avoiding the subject, perhaps out of shame, perhaps out of pain. I didn't insist. It was clear that the wound was still too fresh to talk about openly. I called Peyton several times, but no one picked up. I left messages, simple, no drama, just saying I was here, that I was willing to help if needed. No response. I didn't blame her. After all, I was the one who'd ruined her family, even if well-meaning. Maybe she blamed me as much as she blamed Aiden. Maybe we were both traitors to her, the son who'd cheated on her, and the father-in-law who'd hidden the truth and then revealed it in such a cruel way. But on the 10th day after the package was sent, as I sat on the porch trying to fix the old radio, a disturbing thought struck me. What if something had happened to Peyton and Quentin? What if they're in trouble, needing help, and I'm sitting here honoring their silence instead of acting? That thought kept me on my toes all day. And toward evening, I received a strange call from my neighbor, Mrs. Dawson. Her niece worked at Colstrip Bank and mentioned that she'd seen Peyton looking very upset after a meeting with the mortgage loan manager. That was the final straw. The next morning, I resolutely started my old pickup truck and drove to their neighborhood. I didn't know what I would say or do, but I couldn't sit around any longer waiting for my daughter-in-law and grandson to be in trouble. Their house was in a new neighborhood on the outskirts of Colstrip, not luxurious, but decent, with neat lawns and identical mailboxes by each house. Despite the difficult situation, the yard was perfectly manicured, a mowed lawn, no fallen leaves, pots of fall flowers on the porch. I knew Peyton always cared about the exterior of the house, but under the current circumstances, it was a testament to her strength of character. She didn't put her hands down, didn't let the problems defeat her. I parked at the curb in front of the house and saw Peyton in the yard. She was hanging laundry, a simple, everyday act, but there was so much dignity in it, so much normalcy in the midst of chaos it made my heart ache. She was wearing simple jeans and a stretchy sweater, her hair in a casual bun. Even from a distance, I could tell that she looked tired, but she held herself upright, with that special quiet dignity that had always marked her. I got out of the car and walked slowly toward the fence. She caught sight of me as she hung up the last sheet and stood still for a moment, as if she couldn't believe her eyes. Then she came slowly to the gate. "Walter?" There was surprise in her voice, but not hostility, which was reassuring. "What are you doing here?" "I came to check on you," I answered honestly. "You weren't answering your cell phone, and I was starting to worry." She lowered her eyes, blushing slightly. "I'm sorry. I should have called back. It's just, it was hard. I didn't know what to say." "There's no need to apologize," I shook my head. "I understand." She opened the gate, letting me into the yard. Up close, I noticed how much weight she'd lost in the week since. The circles under her eyes spoke of sleepless nights, and the corners of her lips had new wrinkles from the strain. "Is Quentin in school?" I asked, breaking the awkward silence. "Yes," she nodded. "He has an extra physics class today. He's on the robotics team." "That's great," I smiled. "He's always been a bright boy." "Yeah, he's a lot like you, you know?" She smiled weakly. "Just as stubborn, just as principled. Always follows through, no matter what happens." That was probably the best compliment I could have gotten. The thought of my grandson inheriting something from me warmed my heart. "Why don't we go inside?" she suggested it. I was just about to make coffee. I nodded and followed her in. Inside, the house was clean and well-maintained, as was the yard, but I noticed changes. Many of Aiden's pictures were gone. Some of the furniture had been moved around, as if Peyton was trying to change the space, to make it her own instead of theirs. There were papers on the kitchen table. I caught a glimpse of the bank logo and the word "warning" in large print. Peyton quickly gathered the papers, tucked them away in a drawer as if she didn't want me to see them. But it was too late. I already realized that my fears were confirmed. "How are you?" I asked bluntly as we sat down at the table with mugs of coffee. "How are you doing?" Peyton sighed, running a hand through her hair. "Honestly, it could be worse. The first few days were hard. Quentin didn't understand what was going on. Aiden—" She stammered. "Aiden tried to come back, said it was a mistake, that he'd change. When I wouldn't let him in, he threatened to take Quentin, the house, everything." "He can't do that," I said firmly. "Not after what he did." "That's what my lawyer says too," she nodded. "But there's another problem now. Aiden refuses to pay his bills. He says that since I kicked him out of the house, I should pay for everything myself. The bank's already sent me a mortgage arrears notice." I felt anger rising inside. Not only had my son betrayed his family, but now he was trying to punish them for their own mistakes. "I'll help," I said, without hesitation. "How much do you need?" Peyton shook her head, pride in her eyes. "No, Walter, I can do it. I have a job, I have savings." "Don't be silly," I interrupted gently. "You're family. We help each other when the going gets tough." She looked at me for a long moment, and I could see the struggle in her eyes. Pride fought with practicality, the desire to get by on her own with the realization that sometimes you had to accept help, especially when it came to a child's well-being. "Thank you," she said at last, "but it's only temporary. I'll pay it all back as soon as I'm back on my feet." "Don't worry about it," I said. "I have the money. What else would I spend it on if not my family?" We talked for another hour or so. Peyton told me about her work at the clinic, about how her bosses had agreed to allow her a more flexible schedule because of the divorce situation. She mentioned that in addition to her day job, she'd always freelanced, designing medical brochures, making simple websites for small businesses. "You know what's weird?" she said, putting the empty cups away. "Ever since Aiden moved out, I've started to notice that I have more money. I used to feel like we were barely making ends meet, even though his paycheck wasn't bad and you were helping out. Now that I'm only paying for me and Quentin, it turns out my income is almost enough. There's even something left over." I didn't say out loud what we both knew. Aiden was spending a good part of the family budget on his second life, on Violet and the baby. There was no need to reopen that wound. As I was about to leave, a sudden thought occurred to me. A solution, simple and obvious, that I should have offered from the beginning. "Peyton," I said, stopping at the door, "pack your bags." "What?" She looked at me in confusion. "Pack with Quentin," I repeated firmly. "The car is at the gate. You're moving in with me." Her eyes widened with surprise. "Walter, we can't—" "You can," I interrupted. "There's plenty of room in my house. Most of the rooms are empty. Quentin will love it. There's a garden, a place for his bike, a lake nearby for fishing. But it's too—" she stammered, clearly not expecting such a proposal. "It's not too much," I shook my head. "Your family. A family supports each other. We'll deal with the house later, sell it, rent it out, whatever you want." But there was no point in sitting here now, throwing money away on a mortgage Aiden refused to pay. I could see the struggle in her eyes, between pride and concern for her son. I saw her mentally weighing the pros and cons, thinking about Quentin, about his well-being, about what was best for both of them. "Yeah, I have to think about it," she said finally. "To talk to Quentin. It's a big decision." "There's no time to think," I replied with soft insistence. "You said it yourself. The bank has already sent a warning. They'll start foreclosure proceedings soon, and you'll lose the house anyway. It's better to leave now, on your own terms." She looked at me, and I could see the realization slowly dawning in her eyes that I was right. That pride was a good thing, but not when it was hurting her son, not when there was a sensible, practical solution. "All right," she said at last, "but I'll talk to Quentin first. And I'll help around the house, and the groceries, and with the electric bill. We won't be dependents. Deal." I nodded, respecting her pride and independence. It was a trait I'd always appreciated in people, the willingness to carry their share of the burden, no matter how heavy. We agreed that I would return in the evening when Quentin came home from school to help with things. When I pulled up to their house around 6 in the evening, they were already waiting for me on the porch. 2 suitcases, a few boxes of essentials, everything they had decided to take with them for the first time. Quentin looked both anxious and excited, the way kids do before starting a new adventure. Peyton seemed calm and collected, but I could see a shadow of worry in her eyes. "Are you sure?" she asked quietly as we loaded our stuff into the car. "This isn't too sudden?" "I'm sure." I nodded. "My house is too big for one person. It always had been." She smiled, and there was so much gratitude in that smile, so much relief, that all my doubts melted away. I was doing the right thing, helping my family when they needed help the most. The drive to my house took about 20 minutes. Quentin spent the whole drive asking me about the house, about the garden, about whether I could invite friends over, whether I could have a dog. I answered, trying not to make promises I couldn't keep, but also not to ruin his enthusiasm. Peyton was silent most of the way, staring out the window at the scenery passing by. I couldn't read her thoughts, but I imagined she was thinking about her life, about how things had changed in such a short time, about how she ended up in her father-in-law's car, moving into his house, leaving behind the life she'd spent years building. When we arrived, I showed them the rooms, spacious, bright, overlooking the garden. Quentin marveled at the old desk that had once belonged to Aiden. Peyton appreciated the large kitchen with the real wood stove that Elaine loved so much. "It's so spacious," she said, looking around, "and cozy. It feels like a family has lived in this house." "It was," I nodded, "and it will be again." There was some awkwardness in the first few days, some adjustment, as Elaine called it. We were getting used to each other's routines, to each other's habits, to the little peculiarities that make each person unique. Quentin got up early to catch the school bus. Peyton worked partly from home, partly at the clinic. I continued my measured retirement life, but now it had new rhythms, new joys. Peyton, as promised, took over cooking and most of the housework, but not as a servant, as a full-fledged contributing member of the family. She cooked deliciously but simply, sometimes experimenting with recipes she found in Elaine's old cookbooks. Quentin helped me in the garden, listened to my stories about the mine, asked lots of questions about mechanics, about physics, about how the world worked. Gradually, the house, which for years had seemed too big, too empty to me, filled with life. The sounds of footsteps on the stairs, voices, laughter, the smells of freshly baked bread, laundry hung in the yard. The little things that make a house a home, not just a place where you sleep and eat. 2 months after they moved in, we were sitting in the kitchen in the evening. Quentin had already gone to bed, and Peyton and I were drinking tea and talking. She had just gotten a promotion at the clinic and was happily sharing the news. "You know what the most amazing thing is?" she said, looking at her cup with a thoughtful smile. "Now that I'm only paying for my expenses and Quentin's, I have real savings. I didn't even realize how much money was actually leaking away somewhere before." I nodded, not wanting to state the obvious that money was flowing through Aiden to his second family, to Violet and their child. "Aiden always said that we were barely making ends meet," Peyton continued, as if reading my mind. "That my freelance work was a drop in the bucket, that we wouldn't have survived without your help. And now it turns out that my earnings are not only enough to live on, but also to save." "You've always been a hard worker," I said sincerely, "and smart with money, unlike—" I didn't finish the sentence, but she understood. "Unlike Aiden," she nodded. "Yeah, he was never good with money, always wanting everything, always living beyond his means. I tried to keep a family budget, but he found ways around my control." There was no bitterness in her voice, just a tired acceptance of the fact. She was past the anger stage, the denial stage. Now it was acceptance, a calm, mature realization of what kind of man her husband really was. "Sometimes I think," she continued after a pause, "that maybe it's all for the best. Not that I'm happy about what's happened, but I'm free now. I can make my life the way I want it to be. I can show Quentin what it means to live honestly, within my means, without cheating." I looked at her and saw not a broken woman abandoned by her husband, but a strong, independent person who had been through the ordeal and came out of it more whole, more confident, who did not complain about fate, did not curse her husband who betrayed her, but simply did everything possible to move on, to create a better life for herself and her son. And I saw her not as a dependent living at my expense, but as a true partner, ready to work honestly, to contribute, to take care of those she loves. Unlike her ex-husband, my son, who chose lies and manipulation over honest work and open relationships. "I'm glad you're here," I said, feeling those simple words couldn't express the depth of my gratitude for bringing life back into my empty house. "You and Quentin, you made this house a home again." Peyton smiled, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "We're glad too, Walter. You have no idea how much your support means to us, your acceptance." We sat in cozy silence, broken only by the ticking of the old clock on the wall and the crackling of wood in the stove. Snow was falling outside the window, the first of the year, covering the world with a soft white blanket as if giving everything a new beginning. 2 years flew by. Quentin graduated with honors and received a grant to attend a prestigious technological university 3 states away. Peyton and I were immensely proud of him, though it was with a heavy heart that we prepared for his departure. The house, which had filled with life again over the years, was about to get quieter. On the day Quentin was to be picked up by his future supervisor, Professor Lawrence Fremont, to take him to a university orientation program, we were all a little nervous. Peyton had been hustling in the kitchen since morning, preparing treats in case the professor wanted a snack from the road. I pretended to read the paper, but I'd been staring at the same page for an hour, thinking about how our lives would change after Quentin left. "Are you sure you have everything you need?" Peyton asked for the 3rd time, peering into her son's room. Quentin, mature beyond his years but still wearing his boyish smile, nodded patiently. "Yes, Mom. Everything on the list and more. Professor Fremont said the rest could be bought locally. Peyton sighed, clearly not ready to let her boy go that far. "This professor, is he a trustworthy man?" she asked, trying to hide her concern. "Do you know him well?" "Mom," Quentin rolled his eyes with that peculiar teenage manner that said, "You ask too many questions." Professor Fremont is one of the leading authorities on quantum physics. We corresponded for several months after he read my research paper. He himself offered to pick me up to show me around the campus and labs. I smiled as I listened to their bickering. In those 2 years, Peyton had blossomed. She was no longer the tired, insecure woman I'd picked up from home with shabby suitcases. She was now confidently running a department at the clinic, and her freelancing had turned into a small but successful medical website business. She cut her hair shorter and dressed more colorfully, as if to shed the shadows of her former life. The sound of a car pulling up interrupted my thoughts. Peyton rushed to the window. "Is that him?" she asked, looking at the silver sedan parked at the gate. "It has to be." Quentin nodded, nervously adjusting his shirt collar. "The professor said it would be around 2. We went out on the porch to greet our guest. A man of about 45 came out of the car, tall, trim, with prematurely graying temples but young, lively eyes. He was dressed simply but tastefully. A tweed jacket with leather elbow patches, jeans, hiking boots. Typical professor who doesn't forget about physical activity. "Good afternoon," he waved at us, smiling broadly. "You must be Quentin's family. Lawrence Fremont, very nice to meet you." He walked up to the porch and extended his hand first to me, then to Peyton. I noticed how his gaze lingered on her a little longer than common decency required, and how a slight blush colored her cheeks. "Walter Bishop," I introduced myself, shaking his firm hand. "Quentin's grandfather." "Peyton Bishop," she said, and I noted that she hadn't used the last name Prentice since the divorce had been finalized. "Quentin's mom. Thank you for agreeing to give him a ride. That's very kind of you." "It's my pleasure," the professor replied sincerely. "Quentin is an exceptionally talented young man. His work on quantum entanglement has created a sensation in the department. We are all looking forward to him joining our research group." Quentin smiled embarrassedly, clearly unaccustomed to such open praise. "Would you like to come in?" Peyton suggested. "Have some tea or coffee before we go? I made sandwiches and cake." Professor Fremont glanced at his watch, then back at Peyton, and nodded decisively. "It would be my pleasure. We have a little time to spare." We went into the house and I watched Peyton fussing around the guest, offering him tea, coffee, and homemade lemonade. She seemed, energized. More energized than I'd seen her in recent weeks, when anxiety about her son's impending departure had dampened her mood. The professor, for his part, asked Peyton with genuine interest about her work, about medical websites, about how she handled the technical aspects. He listened attentively, asked intelligent questions, laughed at her jokes. And when she talked about her new project, an interactive app for patients with chronic illnesses, his eyes literally lit up. "It's an amazing coincidence," he exclaimed. "We have a group in our department that deals with the application of quantum computing in medicine. They're working on algorithms for analyzing big patient data. I think it would be interesting for you to get acquainted with their work." Peyton listened with genuine interest, asking questions, sharing her thoughts. I discreetly glanced over to Quentin, who also noticed the sudden spark between his mom and the professor. He smiled slightly at me and nodded slightly, as if approving of what was happening. When it was time to leave, we all walked out to the car. Quentin hugged me first, then held my mother in his arms for a long time, whispering something comforting to her. I could see her holding back tears, trying not to cloud his departure. "Don't worry, Mrs. Bishop," Professor Fremont said as Quentin got into the car. "I'll keep an eye on him. If you don't mind, I could keep you informed of his progress, maybe over a cup of coffee the next time I'm in the area. I have a conference here in a month." Peyton blushed slightly, but nodded with a smile. I'd like that, Professor Fremont. Lawrence, please, he corrected gently. Lawrence, she repeated, and there was something intimate in that simple exchange of names that made me look away, feeling almost like I was invading someone else's space. As the car disappeared around the corner, carrying Quentin away to his new life, Peyton and I slowly made our way back to the house. She was unusually silent, but she didn't seem as depressed as I'd expected. Well, I said, breaking the silence, I think the professor made an impression on you. Peyton blushed even more, but she didn't deny it. He is an interesting man, she said carefully. Intelligent, thoughtful, and clearly interested, I added with a slight smile. She gave me a quick glance as if testing my reaction. Do you mind? I mean, if we, I laughed and put my hand on her shoulder. Peyton, you're 41 years old. You're a beautiful, smart, successful woman. It's been 2 years since your divorce, more than enough time to move on. She smiled with relief. I just didn't want you to think that I was ungrateful for everything you've done for us, for taking us into your home. Nonsense, I dismissed it. This house has been ours for a long time. It'll stay that way no matter what happens. But you deserve to be happy, Peyton. You deserve someone who will appreciate you, respect you, admire you. She hugged me, resting her cheek against my shoulder, the way she always did when she was touched. Thank you, she whispered, for everything. We stood like that for a few moments, and then she pulled away, wiping her eyes. Well, she said, trying to sound cheerful, I guess we'll have to get used to our new life. The house will seem so empty without Quentin. Yes, I agreed. But who knows? Maybe soon we'll have new reasons to be happy. She nudged me lightly on the shoulder, pretending to resent my hint, but there was a spark of hope in her eyes, the same hope I hadn't seen since I'd sent that unfortunate package that had changed our lives. And looking at her, I thought that sometimes the truth, no matter how bitter in the beginning, is ultimately liberating, freeing for a new life, for new possibilities, for true happiness based not on lies and manipulation, but on honesty, respect, and mutual care. Elaine was right, as always. The truth is always better than the sweetest lie, even if the path to it can be painful, even if it destroys what seemed immutable. Because only on truth can you build something truly solid, truly worthwhile. And looking at Peyton's brightening face, at her shy but sincere smile, I realized that she knew it too, and that there were many bright days ahead of us, all of us.